So answering the call of chaos is good and all, but how well can I perform with them? I'll save you the click. Pretty darn well. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Glacial Geek video. I am Phil, the Glacial Geek, and today I wanted to talk about my first endeavors into the competitive world of Warhammer 40k with my Creations of Bile army that I have been working on. I had answered the call of chaos, and I started up this army and I started working with it, and it started to feel good, especially as I started to put together the army. It looked good, it felt right, things seemed to be coming together and cohesing, I don't know, and figuring out bit by bit, each step by step, like coming with a chaos army, going heavy with obliterators, and realizing they don't do what I hope they would do, going with Black Legion at first, and then realizing perhaps the strength of what I want to be doing is better served elsewhere. Essentially, I got myself now into the place where I want to be doing Creations of Bile. They are fast, they are aggressive, they hit hard, and they hit often, which is very much what I enjoy playing the game. Every other time that I've done competitive Warhammer, different armies, different lists, different kinds of games, essentially what happens is I have a good game plan in mind, I have a good list, and then I get overly aggressive and I overcommit and I do things that would not necessarily serve my purposes for winning, and it ends up costing me in the end with my results from the games. I usually have fun and I have a good time at these tournaments, but I get too aggressive, overcommit, and I put myself in a position where it's hard for me to then dig myself out of that hole that I created by my just natural tendencies towards gameplay. So when I was putting together this Chaos army, I noticed very quickly, as anyone else who looks through it will see, that they are very good at being very aggressive and being punchy and being up in your face. And there are certain sub-factions within the Chaos Space Marine army that do codex that do even better at that. And one of those is the Creations of Bile. Essentially, as I went over in my video when I was talking about building a Creations of Bile list, their chapter tactic, for a better term, like Legion trait is what it's actually called, is essentially they have a +1 move and a +1 strength to all units in their army, which means that suddenly now my base stuff is now going to be strength 5, things like Possessed are now strength 6, and it just starts stacking when you start adding on different weapons, like the cursed close combat weapon, which suddenly have a +1 and give them Mark of Khorne, and now they got an additional +1. It seemed right off the bat there that Chaos was looking to be strong and punchy, and to be strong and punchy you also need to be fast, and they brought that with them. The second half of the Legion trait is that they get to fight on death, which means that I am looking to get close in combat, but it becomes hard for another close combat army to try to countercharge me, to try to dull the pain of my assaults coming up there. Because if you get in combat with me, that's fine, because you can punch me, but I'm going to punch back with literally everything that got punched. So you could kill my unit, but my unit's going to kill you in return. And suddenly now, that game of trade where you're trying to charge onto an objective, knock me off, and then hold it, and then give it up when you get charged back, suddenly the math and the equation there gets a little bit flip-flopped here, because now you're getting punched back immediately, even if you got the charge off on me. Or if you decide to interrupt to allow you to fight, you're not going to dull the impact of my charges. I'm going to get the shots off. I'm going to get my punches off. I'm going to be able to hurt you back. And that makes a big difference. When you are an assault army that cannot be preempted, that cannot be stopped by punching first, suddenly now it becomes a lot harder to stop me from doing what I want to do, which is be very aggressive. So, realizing that and seeing that and coming up with the concept of what I wanted to do with this, it became very clear to me that this is what I wanted to do, because it fed my natural tendencies in Warhammer of being aggressive, being fast, pushing up the board, bringing the fight to the enemy, and then just seeing how the dice roll, because that's essentially what the Creations of Bile want to do. Their secondary means that you're getting points by killing things in close combat. I want to be in close combat. I want to punch you. You can try punching me back, but I'm going to keep punching you. And that's what Creations of Bile does, and that's what I like in my gameplay. so it felt like a good fit for me. And I know that generally I've got some pretty good tactics, but again, like I said, I become overly aggressive and I become too much. I try too hard and I push too far and I leave myself out there. And Creations of Bile does not hurt me as much when I do so. In fact, it rewards me very often with that kind of thing. And I can be very aggressive. I can take secondaries like engage on all fronts, behind enemy lines, things like that that want me to be just moving down the board, charging up into my enemy's face, and then punching them in the maw before they can punch me back. And if they punch me, then punching them again in return as a way to remember me for punching me. So, we now have the base set for what it went on. And when I talked about in that last video was it felt right. It felt like things were developing. It felt like things were going well. And this was right before I was about to play in the store championship at Galactic Games, Galactic Cards and Games. Galactic Cards and Games. I can't remember the exact name. It's Galactic in Statesboro, Georgia. Was the 2-day tournament, 5 rounds, 2 days for the store championship. It's the first time I was going to be taking the Creations of Bile out for a spin. The list that I had for it was not quite my ideal list that I had come up with because I was short on a few models that I had to get painted for it, but it still felt strong. It still felt good. Still felt like I had the tools that I needed for it. So going into there, I had this list right here. And as you can see from this list, it's a bit different than what I will eventually have. You will notice that there are obliterators in there. You will notice that there's a one big 10-man squad of possessed. You'll notice that there's only 5 terminators and 5 chosen in there. The list changes, becomes a bit stronger in my opinion. There's also an additional venom crawler in there. So this list definitely had more shooting than my next list will have, but shooting is not what Creations of Bile do. It doesn't help me get my secondaries. It doesn't really help me to get into combat where I want to be. So it gives me some options to try to hedge off threats, but it doesn't give me the oomph, the punch, and the aggressiveness that makes a Creation of Bile list effective, in my opinion. So I went into the tournament with the less effective list, but that's fine. It was still definitely enjoyable. It still felt good. It felt like what I wanted to do with it. And I was pretty successful. I ended up being 3-2 over the course of the 5 rounds. The only people that I lost to ended up finishing 1st and 2nd. And one of the guys I beat ended up 3rd. So I ended up in 5th place overall with how this all went. And actually, it was really good. So the first round, I went up against a Iron Hands list. So it was very dread heavy. It had 3 Leviathan dreadnoughts and a Redemptor dreadnought. So it very much leaned into the strength of that army as well. It was going to be tough because I mean a lot of tough, a lot of high toughness vehicles there that don't really get me the secondary for Creations of Bile. But I knew that I still had to be aggressive. That's how it worked with that. So I went into battle, was able to knock off a bunch of the dreadnoughts. I had Abaddon in that list as well, so he's always really good at taking down big threats, and was able to score what I needed to get me a victory. So had a pretty decent victory there the first round against the Space Marines. Honestly, my list does very well against Space Marines, so it became something that it leaned into what my army can do very well. Going into round 2, I ran into a Black Templar list, which you think, oh, it's Space Marines. Yes, but these are punchy, aggressive, angry Space Marines that do have some counters to a lot of the things I can do. So we ran into it, and I'm going to be honest, this is where the differences in my list really showed, where a 10-man possessed squad is not going to be able to go toe-to-toe with a beefed-up, super supported Templar crusading force that he has going up there with the shield, the Blade Guard veterans and stuff like that. I just didn't have the punch I needed to really go toe-to-toe, and I didn't have the holding power that like a big 10-man brick of Terminators provides me to keep going face-to-face with this. So at the end of the day, we punched each other in the face over and over again, and the Black Templars were able to come out in victory. So I was 1-1 after the first 2 rounds. That gentleman there, Seth, actually ended up winning the tournament, all told, at the end of it. So to lose to the eventual winner who went 5-0 for the entire tournament, there's nothing to be upset about, if I'm being honest. So it was a ton of fun, really aggressive. Both of us are punching each other in the face, and he just was able to hold the center more than I was, and that's how he ended up getting the victory there, which is great. Again, my obliterators there's not enough for them to really be super good. In Black Legion lists, perhaps a bit more because you get that +1 to hit when you're shooting at the closest unit. But beyond that, even it's just that they don't seem to ever really get their points back. They don't shoot strong enough to really do what you need them to. So they became like a bunch of weight for my list, if I'm being honest. That just were not doing what I needed them to. The shooting from the Venom Crawlers is also pretty good, and they can be pretty aggressive in combat, but they're not what I really wanted to be doing with my list. And I started to feel it, especially in that second round, that I was like, these changes that I had planned felt like they were going to be very good. Going into round 3, I ended up going up against an Astra Militarum parking lot list, which was all Lehman Russes and a Baneblade. So suddenly now I'm going into like a real grinder of a list for what I'm going to be doing. He's going to be shooting me really hard. He's not giving up the secondaries that I need for that, so now I'm having to like change how I view things. And it's going to be difficult. So we go in, and I knew that I had to be aggressive, though, because I knew that I had to keep him back to try to keep him from getting primary so that I could respond with that. So I deployed very aggressively because I knew if I deployed unaggressively that anything that I tried to do at that point was going to be hard to deal with. So I deployed aggressively, and he got to go first and start shooting like everything off the board. By the end of turn 1, by the beginning of turn 2, he had killed off all of my Terminators. He had killed off 6 of my Possessed. He had killed off all of my Chosen. It was grim. It was looking real grim. And I'm sitting back here going, I'm just losing models left and right. And I'm like, I don't know if I have what it takes to punch back. But you never give up. What you do is you just lock down, you focus on the secondaries, and you focus on your objectives that you need to do. And I started being aggressive again because that's what Creations of Bile need to be. So I got aggressive, got back in, charged up into his grill as well. Started killing off tank after tank. Abaddon ends up like single-handedly killing a Baneblade in 1 round of combat, who then explodes and does 3 mortal wounds to Abaddon, finally like taking him out in the explosion. Oh, it was super cinematic, super crazy, people dying left and right, jumping onto objectives, punching back on tanks, trying to like tie them up in combat so he has to at least fall back. And because a lot of his weapons were blast, so they couldn't fire back. Oh man, it was, in my opinion, this was probably the most tactical game that I had to play during the entire tournament, because I knew there was nothing I could do other than focus on trying to get the points that I could. And at the end of the day, I was able to get the victory against this list. This is the list that ended up coming in 3rd over in the tournament here. And he did really well. It was a really tough list. And I mean, it was a strong counter to a lot of the things in the meta. It was a strong counter to my list, but I was able to focus on the secondaries that I needed to get the points that I needed to get the victory. So strong game, strong opponent, strong list to fight against, and I got the victory. And that felt pretty good. So day 1, all of a sudden now I'm 2-1. Feeling pretty good about my choice in army and the list and thinking forward and what I'm going to be making the changes and just knowing that I need to be aggressive. So I then go into day 2 and I find myself facing off against the Grey Knights, which again are a tough list because they have got a lot of mortal wounds they can put out. They've got a lot of abilities to shut down the psychic support that I have with my Master of Possessions. And because I've got those psychers, I suddenly can't take, abhor the witch. So like usually the secondary that they give out really well, I can't take now. So seemingly a tough list, but they are Marines. So I know that I can punch pretty hard against those things. And that's what we do. So we go into the battle and I get very aggressive, charge up into him, fight him, bring the fight to him, and do what I need to get my points, to get the secondaries and deny him what he was trying to do. There was some luck with some dice, like he had some unlucky rolls with some of his, with like the psychic secondary that he was doing where he was trying to like do the action on the different objectives. I was able to deny a few to try to keep him from getting his points that way. And that's what it comes down to when you're facing off against an army that is doing psychic actions for points. Use those denies for theirs. It becomes very, tempting to be like, oh, I want to deny Hammerhand. I want to deny Smite. I want to keep myself alive here. And those can be helpful, but understand that perhaps using those denies that you have to keep your opponent from scoring points makes it more makes it more possible for you to win, because the less points they have, obviously, the more chance that you have to win with yours. So at the end of the day, I was able to defeat the Grey Knights and get victory for the Creations of Bile, as as Bile's bad boys continue to march across the table and do what they do best. Super aggressive game, super punchy game. Most of my games, I ended up with very few models left on the table at the end of the game, because that's what it does. It just gets very aggressive, punches hard, fights to the end, and then they get killed off, but I've got more points. I've got the points I need to get the victory. Last game, I ended up against Necrons, and this list was, it was tough. It had the Silent King. It had the big Catan Vault. It had the Catan Nightbringer. It had 2 monoliths. It had a command barge. It had like... It had so much that was very difficult to face. It had a bunch of T8. It was things that were going to be difficult for me to handle, and I knew it. And I went into it, again, knowing that I just had to be aggressive, hope for the best, just keep punching, and that's what I did. And I just went into it aggressively, just kept punching. I ended up killing the Vault. I killed the... I don't think I killed the Silent King, but I killed the Vault. I killed like a bunch of different things that he had on there. One of the monoliths, I think, went down. But at the end of the day, he was able to do the secondaries that the Necrons do so well, was able to get his points that he needed, and he got the victory there. I think I gave him his lowest point win, because he had a lot of 100-point wins on those, and I gave him like one of the lower point wins that he had there, and he ended up finishing second. So we had the Black Templars finished first, Necrons finished second, and then the parking lot finished third, and those were 3 of my 5 opponents throughout the course of the tournament. So my path to victory was definitely a difficult one, and I was happy. I ended up with 3-2. I had some pretty high point wins there. It felt like it was good. The army felt good. It felt like I was able to do what I wanted it to. But I also knew that the changes that I had planned for it were going to be pretty good for what I wanted to do going forward. So that then brings me to last weekend, when I went to the Battle Ready South Georgia Havok GT, where there was about, I think it was 55, 60 people. And it was a big GT, and me and my friends went down there, and down to Valdosta, Georgia, and we knew we were going to fight, and there was a bunch of people there. There was a couple of people from like Art of War, like people that were like heavy hitters, and there was no real slouch list there. Everyone was coming with their A number 1 game, and we knew that it was going to be a tough victory, or a tough battle. So I did change up my list, and this is the list that I had. So as you can see, I made the changes that I wanted. I had a nice big brick of Terminators that were going to be hard to beat down. I had a nice big brick of Chosen that were going to be able to put out a ton of attacks here at AP -4, because they had the Mark of Khorne, and with the icon. They were going to be able to just... I had a lot of punching power, and I had a lot of power that was going to be difficult to counteract there. I had the ability to put out, transhuman, so trans-hitman. I was able to bring back guys, increase toughness and strength. It was going to be a good list, and it felt strong going into it. So turn number 1 down here. I will say every single opponent that I faced this weekend was just... Every opponent I faced the last time was also incredible. So I've had 10 good games. I had 10 incredible opponents that I had a lot of fun with, that we just were able to just battle and have a good time, enjoy ourselves doing the hobby, and do well. And that's what it came down to, and that was really a lot of fun. So, round number 1 here in Valdosta, and I found myself up against Gene Stealer Cult, which are a tough matchup for pretty much anyone. They're super sneaky, they've got their tricks. They also like to hit well, but they also don't care if they kind of lose models. They lose models very fast, and that's fine to them, as long as they're able to like keep on to their objectives and get in their secondaries, and that's how they work. But I was able to just punch a little bit too hard, and I was able to knock down what he needed, and get into the places that I needed, taking the points that I wanted, and at the end of the day, I was able to get the victory against an extremely talented and a lot of fun to play against opponent. A lot of fun. And Gene Stealer Cult are tough. They're tough to wield properly, but my opponent was very good with them, and when they're wielded well by an opponent who knows what they're doing with them, which is not me, they do very, very well. So I found myself doing it was a tough battle. I didn't know how it was going to end up at the end, but I ended up winning with a pretty decent point score. But the way they worked on the rankings in this one was not points. It was first win-losses, which is what every tournament does, and then they went to path to victory. So it basically gives you more points for not losing later in the tournament than earlier on. So essentially the way it is it's basically designed so that if you make it to top table and you've been 4-0 and you're going into the last round of the tournament and you don't drop all the way down to like 8 spots like down because you've lost and weren't able to get the points against like the top player. It means that you've had to play against harder opponents to get to where you got, so you get more points for it. So round number 1 was able to get the victory against the Gene Stealer cult. Felt strong. The list felt much better. It felt like the synergies were working really well. And my idea of having that big brick of Terminators that was just impossible to kill in the center was really good, along with my 10-man chosen squad that I could just shoot into my opponent and take down what I wanted. Just be very aggressive with them. They can advance and charge if they need to. They can move their 7 inches. They've got like a jillion attacks over there, and they're going to be doing it at AP -4 because of the corn. Their base strength 7, and when they charge or are charged, and suddenly I can give them a +1, and suddenly they're strength 8 now, and it's like they can be super aggressive. They can be super strong going in there. Abaddon's doing his thing, punching things as well, but he's not getting me the points for Creations of Bile, so I had to be careful with how I deployed him. It all seemed good, worked very well, had a lot of fun, went into it and was just super aggressive and just had a good time with it. So that was round number 1. Round number 2, I found myself up against Imperial Knights, and I haven't played against Imperial Knights, and it was difficult. He had a whole lot of the small boys along with 1 Crusader. They were doing the free blade lance, so that he had like a bunch of different powers. There were different characters getting different buffs. He was giving out different buffs. That became very difficult. So he was able to get like transhuman on some. He was getting hit transhuman and stuff. Like, there was a bunch of different things that he had going on there. So I knew it was going to be tough because it's a lot of tough 7, high wounds that he was aggressive with a lot of mobility. And I knew that I also just needed to counter with what I did well, which is just get into his grill, punch a lot, and just hope that I could make it to the end. And that's kind of what I did. And Abaddon did a lot of help here because this is also one of those matches up where I wasn't able to take Creations of Bile secondary because there weren't things that weren't vehicles to get the points off of. So I was doing, Bring It Down, which is going to get me a lot of points against a Knights list like this. And at that point, Abaddon is going to make his worth. So having him in the list there for these kind of matchups is huge because he's able to go in there and just kill a Knight per turn as he's charging in. I think he ended up killing like 4 of the small Knights and killed the big Knight in one go by himself. Man, he made back his points. And I didn't give him his Warlord trait, so he's not even getting like the plus D3 attacks. This was just like his base 8 attacks. Like, oh no, just 8 attacks. He's super strong, and that's the kind of this is the kind of matchup that I had him in my list really for, because he's great for going like I had against the tanks in the previous tournament. This one with the Knights, this is what he's there for. He goes in and he can kill anything that he needs to keep me going along there. And just get in the fight and just do what he has to, which was great. So I ended up with the victory against the Imperial Knights, able to take down most of them at the end of the day, and I was able to tie up other ones and just get to where I needed to. I had the honestly the Khorne Chosen did a great job with the AP3 in close combat because there were only a few of his knights that had invols against close combat. And he got very aggressive, I got very aggressive, he got a lot of points, and I got a lot of points, and I ended up with more points against an incredible opponent. It was a ton of fun, and it felt good. So all of a sudden now I'm 2-0 at this GT, feeling like the list is really synergizing, doing what I needed to. Good times. So we go into round 3, and I face off against Khorne Demons with Be'lakor, and he's got Be'lakor. He's got a beefed up Bloodthirster. He's got Scarbrand. He's got like a bunch of the. He's got a couple of the not the hounds. What are the Blood Crushers? And he's got 2 Skull Cannons. He's got a bunch of Bloodletters. Again, we knew it was going to be a fight. We knew it was going to be just like a brutal fight there, and I knew that his Bloodthirster was going to be had like phase lock, so you can only lose 8 per turn or per phase. He also had Be'lakor, who's just like so difficult to do any damage to. And then he has Scarbrand, who's just an angry boy. just doing, massive amounts of stuff, and they're just like tough 8, just so many wounds to try to crack through. And then on top of it, you've got these OBSEC bloodletters that are just dropping down with their AP3 weapons. You've got the blood crushers that are charging in. You've got the skull cannons just shooting out at you, and it's a tough list, and I knew it was going to be a tough list. I went up against my opponent who really knew what he was doing with it, and we just got into battling. I ended up deep striking Abaddon, which is something because in a Black Legion list he's got there and his buffs are going out. Most of his buffs, he can give full rerolls to somebody, but he cannot really give most of his buffs, and most of what he's doing is only going to be on himself. And I thought, well, I need him to be able to respond and do what I need him to. So I had Abaddon in Deep Strike there, and my opponent, and I had behind enemy lines and stuff like that. And I knew that I was going to be having to use Abaddon as a counter to what he was going to be doing to me, because I knew he was going to be aggressive, and I needed to be able to hit where I needed to with Abaddon. So I kept him in reserves. And that became a big part of how I was able to get the victory, because I was able to deep strike Abaddon down to go charge into Scarbrand and hold him down and kill Scarbrand in combat, and then move on to attacking into Bellicor in combat. And it was just the amount of attacks that my Terminators could put out, popping them back up, keeping them around, and just having them just hold against Bellicor and this giant blood thirster in the middle there made all the difference, because I was able to hold him there, do what I needed to for maneuvering with all my other parts and stuff, and able to get in there. I think the 2 5-man squads of Possessed make a really smart call, because they can put out a lot of attacks, they can do a lot of work when they get into combat, but they're also really fast, so they can jump onto objectives, do me actions, they can do whatever I need them to. They're just a lot more versatile than a big 10-man block of them, and they're not as tanky as a 10-man Terminator squad, so they don't need to do that for me. They don't have to serve that purpose for me. They don't have to stick around. They can do what they need to, die, and they've achieved what I want them to for this list. And they did that. They were able to take on some bloodletters. They were able to get a hold behind enemy lines and stuff like that, and just cause a nuisance is essentially what they did best. And they got me points where I needed them to get me points. I had Abaddon to take down some of the big hitters. I was able to, with Fight Last, to be able to hit and kill his Bloodthirster before he was able to kill me off. And it made a big difference being able to respond. As he was killing my guys, I was able to pick and choose which ones were dying so I could put the wounds where I needed to. So as Bellicor swung into my Terminators there, they had Fight Last, so I wasn't going to be able to respond. He killed a bunch of Terminators, and I put those Terminators into his Bloodthirster and was able to take his Bloodthirster's last few points because of that. And it made a big difference, being able to just make those kind of tactical decisions that the Creations of Bile allowed me to while engaged in close combat, while engaged with my opponent, makes a big difference in my ability to respond and my ability to do what I need to with this list to get the points that I need. So at the end of the day, I was able to pull off a victory. And it felt good. That's the end of day 1, and suddenly I'm 3-0 against 3 very good opponents, against 3 extremely nice and fun opponents. I've had 3 really great games, had 3 really productive games, and I'm 3-0 and a GT. I've been 3-0 at a GT before, but so then we go into day 2, which is usually the downfall, where my Icarus wings start to melt as I fly too close to the sun. And I had a bit of that. So day 2, I'm 3-0, and I run into my one of my roommates that I was staying with while we were up there from down here in Savannah, Nick, and his Necrons. And he had a strong list. I mean, he had all the good stuff. He was, pre-game move with the OBSEC. He had a bunch of the bikes that could go up and do the missions that he needed, the secondaries he needed to. He had a big, huge blob of the Necron destroyers to shoot me. He had a bunch of, a ton of Scorpeg destroyers, so he wants to fight with me too, so he's not afraid of getting into combat. He had the Wraith doing the same thing. It was going to be a tough matchup, and I knew it was going to be a tough matchup, and I knew that he was going to be able to get his secondaries that he needed to. So I overloaded one side. I chose which ones I wanted for his objectives on that side. I had a strong force on the other side, but I basically used my Chosen really as the sacrificial lamb, that they were going to be over there. He could get some shots on them, and he overloaded on that side. And then turn 1, he just twisted. So basically now, as opposed to us starting as we were in Hammer and Anvil, we now suddenly switched flanks and we're looking across each other like it's Dawn of War. And just going into the fight, I sent Abaddon in to do what he needed to. I was able to keep him alive against all this shooting. He was able to take down most of the Necrons. And it was a back and forth. There was very few Necrons alive, even less Creations of Bile at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, it was such a close game. I think it was 6 points separated us, but the Necrons were able to get their win, get the victory, go on 4-0, and I was 3-1 at that point, which at that point is going to top where I could achieve at that point, because there was 4 undefeateds going into the 5th round, and the way that the path to victory works, that means that the highest I could achieve was 5th. So the 5th round, we go in, and I battle up against Blood Angels. And again, I know they want to be aggressive. I want to be aggressive. But I also feel like my guys do well into fighting into Marines. And I knew that this matchup was going to be good for me. And it was. And I was able to just, I think I ended up tabling her with her Blood Angels. We had a lot of fun. We had a good time back and forth. But it was just the Biles buddies were just a bit too much to handle for the Blood Angels. And that's just the reality of what the lists were going to do, what the armies were going to do with that matchup. So it was super fun, super back and forth. There was one moment that was great. I had Dante charged into my Dark Apostle, and he still had his 2 little buddies. And Dante was able to kill both the buddies and bring down my Dark Apostle to 1 wound left. Has 1 wound left. We're engaged in combat, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to fall back out because then I'm going to charge into Dante with my Terminators, and that sounds good. So I fall back, and she goes, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to use that 2 CP strat that nobody ever uses, and I'm going to try to cut them down. And I'm like, okay. It's like, yeah, so you have to roll a d6 for every unit in your unit that is in engagement with the unit that is trying to fall back. So she got 1 roll, and you need every 6 that happens, you do a mortal wound. So he has 1 wound left. She has 1 die, and she needs the 6 to try to cut down my Dark Apostle. And I think, as you can tell by the smile on my face, where this story is going, sure enough, she rolls, that 6 pops up, and boom, Dante just goes, absolutely not, and just kills my Dark Apostle. That was probably the funniest and most hilarious moment of the entire tournament as that goes on there. But yes, I was able to get the victory, killed a whole bunch of Blood Angels, and ended up 4-1 for the first time in my ever at a 5-round tournament, ending up 4-1. Feeling really good with the results, feeling like the army performed really well. To be 6 points away from being able to go, into the undefeated round there in 5th round, it's pretty good. That was like the first time. That was also these were the first 5 games that I've used this exact list, and I already am thinking about things that I can do to make it better. And it was just a ton of fun. Ending up 5th out of 55 people is incredible. And I did really well. So I ended up at the top of my little bracket of people that we could be there. And just finished at the highest that I could after round 4 there. Felt really good, and it felt awesome. And I had some good points so that if I play this list in an army into a tournament that does do with points, I could do even better. Who even knows? It was just a ton of fun. Really good opponents. Really good competition, tough games that I was able to get the victory between, just knowing how my army is working now. And it feels like it's starting to flow. And the tournament at Statesboro, as much as I didn't have all the tools I needed, I was understanding how things were operating and seeing how things worked, and was able to do what I needed to get the victory there down in Valdosta. So it felt good. And now I am getting ready to go off to Kansas City next week for the GW Open there. And I'm going to be bringing basically the same list. The balanced data sheet has come out and nothing got touched to my stuff. So I'm going to go with that same list. I am going to change something, though. So the thing that I'm going to change is going to be the warlord traits on my... it's going to be the warlord traits on my Lord Discordant, because he did all right. He did pretty good. But I feel like he could do better. So right now I had him with the Gaze of the Gods, which gives him a 4-up invul save and all of the Wontons, which felt good, and it was times when it helpful, but there were a lot of times when I wasn't able to get into combat like the first 2 rounds, and then it's like I'm wasting it because I'm going to get him into the combat doctrines anyway, and he's shooting a Bale Flamer, so I'm not getting hits off of his shooting. It's all about his close combat stuff. So with that in mind, I've decided to just make him more aggressive. So I am going to give him Spites of Flame, which gives him reroll wounds, and any wound roll of a 6 that I get does a mortal wound in addition. So suddenly now I can reroll wounds. I've got, what does he have, 14 attacks that he's going to be going in there with. And then if I've got the wontons, they can explode on hits of 6s. So I've got minimum 14 attacks going in there. Looking for 6s to wound. I can reroll wounds with him. I'm putting out a bunch of mortal wounds with that. I am also, because he is undivided, going to give him Urlok the Black, which is the demon weapon, and putting it on his chain glaive. Because you can't put it on his bladed limbs. You have to, if you're going to put it onto a Lord Discordant, you have to put it onto his main weapon. So I'm going to put it on his main weapon there, and Urlok the Black says that if I get a, if I do a wound with him, it does a mortal wound in addition. So now I am going to be getting, on those 6 attacks that he has base there, plus any that like explode, any wounds that happen will do a mortal wound. Any wounds of 6 will do 2 mortal wounds. And then on the bladed limbs and the mechadendrites, any wound rolls of 6 will do an additional mortal wound to the damage they put out there. And at that point, I'm putting out a lot of wounds. He's hitting on 2s. You know, I can give him full rerolls. I can just do reroll. Every wound roll is going to be a reroll there. So hopefully he'll be putting out a lot of mortal wounds, be able to be very aggressive and bring the fight to the enemy even more so than he already has, which is great. And that's kind of what I need him to do. I need everything in my list just being aggressive, being a force of just killingness. And I think he's going to be doing really good with that. So I think even just that slight change is going to give me an additional edge going forward with this. There are some changes down the line. I might think like a Demon Prince would be great. But what I would have to give up at this point to get the Demon Prince, I don't feel like it's worth it. So that's what I'm going to be going with. I think right now I'm just going to do some minor tweaks because, I mean, if it's not broke, don't fix it. I went 4-1 and lost a game by 6 points as opposed to trying to go 5-0. You know, I can't really complain with that kind of result. And I think these minor tweaks might be the difference of 6 points going forward that I could possibly have. So with that in mind, that's what my list is going to be. It feels really good. I'm super excited that over the course of 10 games that I went 7-3, 4-1 for the first time at a 5-round GT for me. I found an army that works well with me. I found an army that speaks to Phil and speaks to Phil's stupidly aggressive playstyle, and I think that it's going to be a lot of fun to see how this can develop going forward as I just get even better and better at playing this army. So, let me know if you guys think about the list. Let me know what you think about how this all works. And if you have any thoughts or ideas or ways to tweak and make it better, give me your thoughts down in the comments because I really want to hear how this works. It felt fun. It felt like I was doing what I needed to and I was able to get the points that I needed to. So I'm very excited about seeing how this goes. And if any of you are in Kansas City for the GW GT, come say hi to me. I'll be walking around. I'll look like this. So, I hope you guys have all enjoyed this. I certainly have. I have been Phil, the Glacial Geek as always. And until next time, stay safe and have fun.